Peter B. Collins News and Comment. It's Thursday, September 14th, 2017. I've got a big question to ask you today. Why do we need tax cuts? What is the basis, the rationale? And how will they be paid for? Well, inside the Beltway, bandits of both parties are lining up to ram through legislation that hasn't even been written, detailed, or analyzed yet they call it tax reform. And I've been watching this act since the 1970s. And whenever they talk about tax reform, it means that well-positioned interest groups will get a break, and the rest of us will pay more. The tax code will not be simplified, and the beat will go on. And what's fascinating to me is that the people who just 1 year ago, the Republicans who were hammering Barack Obama because his annual deficits, the budget deficits, were running up the long-term national debt. And during the campaign, we heard all those Republicans running against Obama, who was not on the ballot, as we all know, hammering him for the debt that was required to rebuild the economy after Wall Street and the Republicans wrecked it back in 2007, 2008. And Obama's failure to remind American voters that it was Republicans who ran the economy into a ditch, and then he had to use TARP and the Detroit bailout and other methods to try to restart the economy. It derailed his agenda in the first year. And now, those deficit hawks, because they have a compliant Republican president, talk only about the beauty of cutting taxes, like crack for the Republican base. Oh, and there are plenty of Democrats, the corporate Dems, who are eager to cut taxes for Apple and other corporate tax evaders who have billions, over $1 trillion, stashed offshore, out of the reach, technically, of the U.S. tax authorities. They want a 15% corporate tax rate, even though corporations rarely pay that rate. And there are many highly profitable corporations that pay no tax. Some of them even get refunds. And so as you hear this evolve, keep asking the question, why? The economy is growing. Unemployment is declining. And while we will never regain the middle-class manufacturing jobs that made America kind of great in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, there is no case that we need an economic stimulus, that tax cuts in reality will cause the economy to grow, will in fact create more jobs in this country. It's all just smoke and mirrors and a whole pile of bullshit. But everybody wants lower taxes. I'm an aggressive taxpayer. I don't pay more than I am required to fork over to the government, and tomorrow is a day when I have to send money to Washington and to Sacramento because I'm a self-employed estimated tax filer. But nobody is making the case that, this really will produce more jobs. It's just this vague promise of trickle-down economics that we have seen fail repeatedly in the past. And that doesn't stop the Republicans from trotting out the failed Laffer curve and the idea, if you cut taxes, well, the economy is going to grow and the Treasury will actually net greater revenues. There's no proof of that. And the Republicans will be sure to never answer those questions or deal with these issues in any rational way. Because the emotional appeal of tax cuts is like free candy, it's like free crack, it's like a free ride on Air Force One. And the two-faced Republicans, who were deficit hawks to Obama and tax cutters to Trump, they will pay no penalty. Their voters simply don't care, and they would like to pocket the extra money. And it's the corporate Democrats, launched by Bill Clinton and the Democratic Leadership Council in the early 1990s, into the corporate sphere. They love their Silicon Valley donors. They'll grease the way for Apple to pay as little tax on the profits stashed technically offshore. They're in the Bank of New York, for God's sake. But they'll play that game. And they'll get benefits in terms of campaign contributions, and they're going to really feel good about it. It's just a farce, and both parties are playing along to see what they can get out of it. Meanwhile, Chuck and Nancy went to dinner with Don last night at the White House, and they apparently hammered out the framework for a deal over the DACA Dreamer Group. And first, let me tell you that I think it's absolutely grotesque for our leaders to be bargaining over the fate of people who only recently became hostages because Trump notified the Congress that they had 6 months to act because he was unilaterally and arbitrarily ending Obama's executive order that protected the Dreamers under DACA. That said, Nancy and Chuck say that Trump agreed that he would sign legislation to maintain protection for the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals group in exchange for border security that Chuck and Nancy say explicitly does not include the wall on the southern border. And Chuck and Nancy seem to be okay with wasting money on sensors and drones and enhanced border security that's not really defined in order to free the hostages and to avoid being roped into funding the wall that, of course, Mexico will pay for. Yeah, right. Now, this is the second time in a week that Trump has screwed his pooches on Capitol Hill. The lapdogs named Mitch and Paul. And respectively, McConnell and Ryan are steaming. McConnell said, as Congress debates the best ways to address illegal immigration through strong border security and interior enforcement, DACA should be part of those discussions. We look forward to receiving the Trump administration's legislative proposal as we continue to work on these issues. And Paul Ryan also reminded the president that he needs the majorities in both houses in order to pass this legislation. But his end run to the Democrats forces the hand of the Republicans, puts them in a very awkward position. And Trump, who has been taking some time off from Twitter, and we're all a little bit relieved at that, he whipped out his phone earlier today. He said the wall, which is already under construction in the form of new renovation of old and existing fences and walls, will continue to be built. The wall will come later. We're right now renovating large sections of wall, massive sections, making it brand new. Huh? I mean, this guy, he is so bizarre and believes that he can create his own reality and his Trumpers will just accept it. And he tweeted in favor of the Dreamers. He said, does anybody really want to throw out good, educated, and accomplished young people who have jobs, some serving in the military? Really, exclamation point. A second tweet, they've been in our country for many years through no fault of their own, brought in by parents at young age, plus big border security. It's like he's writing ad copy. But Steve King, the Neanderthal Republican, a Republican from Iowa, tweeted, Trump base is blown up, destroyed, irreparable, and disillusioned beyond repair. No promise is credible. And over at Breitbart, where Steve Bannon is back in charge, wasn't he always? The headline reads, Amnesty Don. Trump decided to take a swipe at Hillary on her book tour, and apropos of nothing else, tweeted, Crooked Hillary blames everybody and everything but herself for her election loss. So this does become a problem for the Republican base, And the extent to which Trump is splintering his base and dividing Republicans, one can only applaud this misguided effort, politically misguided effort. But the buzzword that will really cause him pain is the idea of amnesty. That is the hot-button Republican term that is used to try to kill any reasonable effort to address immigration issues. And as he arrived in Florida to inspect the damage from Hurricane Irma, he told reporters, "We're not looking at amnesty, we're looking at allowing people to stay here." Now, the issue is whether those covered by the DREAM Act, which does provide a long-term path to U.S. citizenship, will be considered receiving amnesty. And Nancy Pelosi says, look, he agreed to the terms of the DREAM Act, and that's what's in the bill. And this is one of Trump's biggest flaws. He doesn't know what is in the bills that he is supporting or opposing. He just wants to sign shit. And he doesn't really care about the details. So we've got Congressman Andy Biggs, a big supporter of the wall, congressman of Republican stripes from Arizona. "Nothing short of a physical wall will suffice. I disagree that the focus of our efforts should be on creating yet another amnesty program. Instead, Congress should prioritize full enforcement of our immigration laws, eliminating incentives that drive illegal immigration and fully funding a physical border wall." These guys are dreaming. If they think that building a wall will actually stop people from coming over the border, oh, they will find ways. People are resourceful. But as I mentioned, this is splintering the Republican Party. And Sean Hannity, who has been Trump's boy and a big cheerleader, even, during the darker days of the loss on Obamacare repeal, well, he started hedging his bets with tweets that, say that he may abandon Trump, but he always has qualifiers like, oh, it's not his fault, Republicans aren't supporting the president enough, and that his bad moves are caused by that. But this is daylight between Trump and a very important ally in the media. And how about Ann Coulter? Now, I have no respect for this woman whatsoever, but she is a useful idiot. And her comments to the Daily Beast and to some right-wing radio show she was on in Baltimore yesterday, she said that she has really had it with Trump. And, of course, her most recent book is called In Trump We Trust, E Pluribus Awesome. That makes it pretty uncomfortable for her, doesn't it? Anyway, she said that she is really fed up with Trump. At this point, who doesn't want Trump impeached, she said. And another point, she said that at this point, she prefers President Pence. Here it is. "If we're not getting a wall, I'd prefer President Pence." In a tweet, she said, "Let's play Jeopardy. Answer an Easter egg. Question, what's the only thing easier to roll than Donald J. Trump?" Asked by Daily Beast if Trump had conned her, she said, "No, I saw him very clearly. You put your money down on a horse, and sometimes he doesn't win, place, or show." And on a radio program, she said that Trump is the worst negotiator she's ever seen. Well, welcome to my perspective, Ann Coulter. Where have you been, huh? Now, here is your daily minimum adult required allotment of irony. This comes from BuzzFeed News. In a leaked memo, Trump's national security advisor, General H.R. McMaster, has decreed that every member of the administration will submit to at least a 1-hour session where they will be reminded of their obligations to keep national security secrets secret and to avoid spilling sensitive political information as well. And get this, the training materials that the general has provided for the unfortunate government workers who will have to submit to this include a 15-minute C-SPAN video of Attorney General Jeff Sessions' August news conference where he threatened leakers, and a 6-minute Fox News video of an interview with the National Counterintelligence and Security Center's director. That'll show him, won't it? The memo is written to virtually everybody in the government. It was written on September 8th, and it leaked yesterday. The seminars should be held the week of September 18th to the 22nd. And here's a lovely qualifier in McMaster's memo. It is particularly important to stress the sharp difference between unauthorized disclosures of information and whistleblowing, the responsibility of all federal employees to report waste, fraud, and abuse through proper channels. Yeah, right. I'm sure you want people to know that distinction, and you'll welcome whistleblowers who step forward to disclose waste, fraud, and abuse. I can't wait for that. Every day I pause for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like Alex Croakey, who just voluntarily kicked in $50 for my new equipment fund. Thank you very much, Alex. Ethan Knox is a monthly subscriber, and Stuart Russell is a $10 a month contributor. I'm really grateful to the people who support my work, and I invite you to join them. I can always use your financial support because I don't make a living doing this podcast. I do it because, well, it makes me healthier. So go ahead, point your fancy phone to peterbcollins.com, click on the menu button, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber, and choose a level of support that's comfortable for you and your budget. I truly appreciate it. Well, in their effort to strangle Obamacare because they couldn't get it repealed through Congress, the Health and Human Services Department has announced huge cuts to the outreach budgets. They're called navigators. These are usually nonprofits or community groups that get a little federal funding, and they have advisors who help people pick through the exchange and find a policy that they can afford and that fits their particular needs. And the program is being shrunk overall by 41%, but in some states the cuts are as much as 62%. And as the limited open enrollment period comes up in November, these funds will be missed because people who want to sign up for the Affordable Care Act for insurance before the Republicans find a way to snuff it out will have a hard time finding the information and support that has been available in the past. And this is just another underhanded way that the Republicans are trying to achieve their nefarious goal outside of the political process. Kim Jong-un is saying, hey, I'm still over here, I still got a nuke, and I guess you stopped paying attention to me for a day or two. So North Korea has issued some new threats. Quote, Japan is no longer needed to exist near us. The 4 islands of the archipelago should be sunken into the sea. And not only that, North Korea leveled some new threats at the United States. Let's reduce the U.S. mainland into ashes and darkness. Let's vent our spite with mobilization of all retaliation means which have been prepared till now. Now this, of course, is useless bluster, but it raises the question, what will it take for Trump to resume tweeting at Kim Jong-un? I'm sure we will find out in short order. Meanwhile, the New York Times is sounding the alarm about Russia's war games. They're collaborating with only one other nation, Belarus, and they have created the fictional state of Vyshnoraya. And the exercise is a military conflict between Russia, Belarus, and Vyshnoraya. And this has the New York Times with its panties in a bunch. There are fears that Moscow may be moving far more troops into Belarus than it intends to withdraw, establishing a permanent military presence there on the border with NATO countries. Now, NATO staged massive war games along the entire border with Russia and the eastern nations in Europe. And, of course, that meets with the approval of the New York Times and the chattering class here in the United States. And, Russia may have schemes up its particular sleeve. And one of the details that intelligence is pointing out is that the Defense Ministry of Russia has ordered 4,000 railway wagons to transport military equipment and soldiers to Belarus, which speaks to a larger deployment than they have admitted. And, of course, Europe has war games underway. Sweden kicked off Project Aurora, this year's war games featuring more than 20,000 troops, but that did not even draw a mention from the New York Times. And I hold in my hand a pretty heavy document here. This is a printout of a story that will appear in the New York Times Magazine this weekend, written by their media critic, Jim Rutenberg. And I printed it out. It's 29 pages, something like that, 24 pages. And it restates a lot of the unproven narrative about Russia's attempt to meddle in our election last year. It cites the case of a German girl named Lisa, who initially claimed she had been raped by 3 refugees in Germany, and then she recanted her story. It was then picked up by RT and amplified by Sputnik, and this is used to conjure up the idea that Sputnik and RT are having a deep and outsized influence on American public opinion, and that they are promoting division and a kind of breakdown of the center in the United States. Here's a juicy paragraph that's full of BS. All of this paled in comparison with the role that Russian information networks are suspected to have played in the American presidential election of 2016. At least they say suspected. In early January, 2 weeks before Trump took office, American intelligence officials released a declassified version of a report titled Assessing Russian Activities and Tensions in Recent U.S. Elections. It detailed what an Obama-era Pentagon intelligence official, Michael Vickers, described as the political equivalent of 9/11. Now, this is so over the top. It is so exaggerated. Here's a quote from that report. Russian President Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election, and the goal was to elect Trump. Now, this rehashes the same unproven assessments and allegations, and it takes off on the final 6 pages of the January 6th report from the intelligence agencies that attacked the cable network RT. Now, it's obvious that RT is intended to insert into American public opinion and discourse views that are favorable to Russia. That's why they do it. That's why we have Radio Free Europe, the Voice of America, Radio Marti and TV Marti aimed at Cuba, the Al Hura propaganda network that operates in the Middle East. Most of those don't get mentioned. Instead, the Times takes us back to post-World War II, when the U.S. began its propaganda operations in reaction to what they claimed were Russian propaganda mischaracterizations of American troops who were still in Germany. And they go all the way back to the Marshall Plan, and they do mention some of our propaganda efforts, but not Al Hura, not Radio Marti, which are the most current examples. And when you read through this lengthy piece, you will find that they create the illusion that RT has a powerful influence in the United States. I'm sure most of my listeners don't even know that Ed Schultz left MSNBC and has been on RT for about a year. And Ed Schultz didn't support Putin. Likewise, Chris Hedges, the very talented former correspondent for the New York Times, has a show on RT. It gets a mention in this New York Times article, but they don't explain what the real message of Chris Hedges is. And so here's a reference. Chris Hedges, the former Times correspondent, said Trump had a penchant for lying and deception and manipulation. So they do point out that the Americans who have shows on RT are not towing a Kremlin line that is predictable or identifiable. but they spill thousands of words and gallons of ink to create the illusion that this is a serious threat, when in fact I think it is business as usual. Yes, Russia tries to affect American public opinion, and the United States spends a lot of time and effort and a lot of your tax dollars doing the same in Russia and other parts of the world. It's amazing. A couple of quickies before I wrap up. Yesterday I mentioned Naomi Klein warning that Irma and Harvey are not going to convert Republicans to embrace the science of climate change because it conflicts with their fundamental greed. Well, the Times today has an article, and it's focused on Senator Brian Schatz, the Democrat from Hawaii, who says, well, these storms are having an impact. The conversation is shifting. Because even if you don't believe liberals, even if you don't believe scientists, you can believe your own eyes. And Schatz argues that as long as we don't mention climate change because the phrase is too politically loaded, that he thinks Republicans will support mentions efforts to reinforce coastlines, build seawalls, and support solar and wind energy production. Just don't mention the double C, okay? I want to thank Robert Blumen for sending me an article from the Daily Beast about a South Carolina county that has picked up more than its fair share of surplus Pentagon military machinery, including an MRAP and another armored personnel carrier. I'll link to the story in the show file for today's podcast, but it shows how crazy it is that the Trump administration has reopened the doors of the Pentagon to pass military equipment to local police departments after that door was slammed shut by Obama after Ferguson. Two deeply hated people in this country make the news today. Martin Shkreli, the pharma bro who was convicted of fraud back in August and it was awaiting sentencing. Well, his bail was suspended. He was sent to jail yesterday after a federal judge said that his offer of $5,000 for a strand of Hillary Clinton's hair was a solicitation to assault in exchange for money that is not protected by the First Amendment. Shkreli is an idiot, and he, I think, has gotten what he richly deserves there. Anthony Weiner is now blaming his teenage victim, the victim of his sexting, because she was trying to affect the outcome of the election last year, and she's now writing a book to profit on her exploitation by Anthony Weiner. We don't know this girl's name. She's still a minor. We have seen her picture, and she's spoken on camera. And all I can say is that it's a bizarre story. And Weiner's lawyers are arguing that the former congressman was suffering from a sickness when the 15-year-old girl reached out to him via Twitter, looking to generate material for a book that she is now shopping to publishers. I mean, this is so far-fetched, and an effort to displace the liability, the responsibility that Weiner has for his perverse and inexcusable behavior. And now to try to blame it on this young woman who may or may not be publishing a book. She's earned about $40,000 for doing pay-for-play interviews, which is a little bit tawdry. But, you know, tawdry is mild compared to what Anthony Weiner did. Well, this week, Apple unveiled its iPhone X to cost over $1,000. It's already getting pushback because the security feature is facial recognition, and a cop could force you to look at your phone and open it. So I'm linking to a piece that was published on an obscure blog, and it is a real indictment of Apple and the way it manufactures the iPhone, noting that Foxconn, the Chinese manufacturer that makes most of the iPhones or does the final assembly, has been the scene of many suicides, and that while Foxconn has been shamed into making some changes, they are not significant. And still, the iPhone is a product of sweatshop labor in China. Hey Siri, how many Foxconn workers making iPhones have tried to commit suicide.
Here's what I found on the web for how many Foxcatcher and workers making iPhones have tried to commit suicide. Have a look.
That's Foxconn Siri, not Foxcatcher. Thanks for listening to my News and Comment podcast today. I remain your humble host, Peter B. Collins. This podcast is available on YouTube.
Happy trail.